Good afternoon, everybody. It's 1:30, so let's go ahead and get started. Yeah, so today we're going to be focusing on writing the introduction as well as getting a big overview of research designs. But first, before we get started with that, I want to kind of just bring up the next 2 week schedule, just so that way you have some things on the back of your mind to keep into consideration. So, like I said, today we're going to talk about the introduction section, how to write an introduction section, as well as a couple of slides just as an overview of research designs. And then assignment number 4 will be assigned today, which is writing the intro outline, but we'll get into that in a little bit. This Wednesday is going to be all about descriptive studies. Prior to Wednesday, I'm hoping tonight, but if not tonight, definitely tomorrow. I'll get you a study guide for the exam because exam number 2 is coming up this coming Monday. So keep that in the back of your mind. Then this Friday, we're going to finish up whatever we don't get finished on Wednesday with descriptive studies. We're going to jump into how to write the methods section, as well as there will be plenty of time for anyone to ask any questions about exam number 2 or about assignment number 4, the intro outline, or assignment number 5, which will be given on Friday, which is about writing the methods section. Then this Sunday, assignment number 4 will be due. So the assignment that you're getting today will be due on Sunday, as well as quiz number 5 like normal. I believe it's quiz number 5. It might be quiz number 6. No, it's quiz number 5. Assignment number 4. So it is technically due Sunday at midnight, I believe. However, if you get it in by Saturday at noon, I'll give you 2 extra credit points for your extra credit section. So yeah, if you can get that into me by Saturday at noon, you get a couple extra credit points. Just that way I can start grading it over the weekend instead of waiting. All right, then next Monday is exam number 2. It'll be just like last exam. I believe Respondus Monitor should be working this time. So keep that into consideration. Then on Wednesday, we're going to be talking about graphing. And I'm going to be talking about data and SPSS. I'm going to download it, clean it all up, talk about it a little bit, show SPS around. You don't need to have SPSS by Wednesday. By next Wednesday. However, I would suggest that you have it by Wednesday, just so the way you could possibly pull it up as well and maybe walk through it with me. Then finally on Friday, next Friday, we will have a graphing lab. So the class is all going to be about graphing, and you are going to have time to work on assignment number 6. So you'll get assignment number 6 next Friday, and then you will complete it by the end of class. It's not too bad. You're just making a couple graphs from your data. So you will need SPSS for next Friday. That is you will definitely need it for Friday. However, I would suggest possibly getting it prior, obviously get it prior to Friday, but possibly even prior to Wednesday, just so that you can have it. And then following Sunday, assignment number 5 is due. So I just wanted to bring this up to show you what the next 2 weeks are going to look like. There's a lot of things that are going to be due, but that's just the nature of the course. All right, so let's jump into writing the introduction. So what is an introduction? All of you have presumably have read introductions before, and maybe you've noticed a common theme because all introductions are kind of written in a similar way. The point of an introduction is to introduce the problem that your research study is focusing on. You bring it up, you bring up prior research that has looked at that topic. You write a cohesive scientific story about why you are doing your study. So it puts the problem, a good introduction puts the problem at hand in context and explains why the issue is important. At the bottom, visually, this may help some people, but the general organization of an intro is you start off with your introduction paragraph, the first paragraph of your introduction, with this big picture issue. It's, you're not talking specifically about your study, but rather just kind of the general essence of your study. And we'll get more into that, and I think it'll make a lot more sense with some examples. But then finally, you narrow it all the way down to your specific study that you talk about and your hypothesis in the final paragraph of the introduction. So there's three basic parts to an introduction, so let's break it down. So introducing the problem. So obviously you need to talk about or bring up, what is your research question, right? Why are you doing your study? What are you actually studying? For some of these groups, you're studying the relationship between social media and I think self-esteem and perceived stress. Other groups are looking at exercise and self-esteem, body image and self-esteem, body image and perceived stress. So this is what is your research question and what is the big picture of the investigation? So what do you kind of need to provide some facts to get your story started. And once again, we'll explain a little bit more with examples in the next two slides. But your main goal here of your introductory paragraph is to get your readers interested in a topic. There is, what's the first thing besides from reading the abstract? Someone might read the first line of your paper, right? They start reading. If it's not interesting, they're just going to skip your paper. And a good introductory paragraph provides context for the remainder of the intro. So in your first paragraph, you set up this argument that, hey, the research that we are doing here in this study is important for these reasons. Or maybe not even important, is legitimate. Here's why we are doing it. Here's why we think our variables are related. And you kind of do that in the very intro, in the very beginning of the intro. So let's go in. I think makes a lot more sense with some examples. Let's go in and break apart the first paragraph of the introduction. And I want to time out and say that the outline that you're going to be doing for assignment number 4, so assignment number 4, and we'll bring it up in depth later, is an outline. In this assignment, we really break down like almost sentence by sentence, which should be in your paragraphs. So don't worry too much about like, oh, he said, going back here, he said, what is the big picture, or provide context? How do I do that? Don't worry. We'll talk more about it in this PowerPoint, but also that assignment does a really good job at laying it out. But anyways, so the first paragraph of your introduction section should grab the attention with an eye-catching first sentence or two. And now, when I say eye-catching, I mean scientifically eye-catching. You can make a really good fiction eye-catching first sentence. That's not what we're after here. So a bad opening sentence is, hey, this study is about X, Y, and Z. We are doing this. That doesn't really engage the reader. Instead, maybe you could say, hey, recent research has demonstrated that adolescents are the gatekeepers of parent knowledge about youth free time activities and whereabouts. So we're kind of setting the stage. I know that I'd assume that the remainder of the introduction and the study is going to be about adolescents and parents and what parents know about what their kids are doing and where they're at. So we started off with this good sentence. I'm gonna talk more specifically about your research designs and some good opening sentence ideas for you, but that will be in a little bit. Anyway, so you have your first sentence that kind of provides this eye-grabbing sentence, right? Then next, in this same paragraph, you're gonna wanna summarize a critical previous finding. So some finding that is related to your research that kind of puts your research into context. So potentially, has prior research found a relationship between social media and self-esteem? Has prior research found a relationship between exercise and self-esteem, or whatever two variables you're looking at? Then you want to transition into what's unknown, so your topic. So then you say, but more research needs to be done investigating the relationship between social media and self-esteem, or exercise and self-esteem, or whatever your two variables are. And then finally, you clearly state your topic and it conveys importance. Hey, we are going to be researching this. So by the end of the section, the reader is engaged. They have a general idea of what's going on. So the topic is clear and the reader understands the importance of the issue. So I'm going to go through the remainder 2 parts of the introduction, and then I'm going to show you, actually, you know what? Let me just show you right now. Let's see, do I have it pulled up? I do. So let me show you, maybe a little biased because it's my own paper, but let me show you my introductory paragraph for my paper on depression. So long story short, I was looking at mom depression and child depression and how they're two related, and maybe another variable that could explain that relationship. So that gives you the general gist of my study. So let's look at my introductory paragraph. So this is the first paragraph of the paper. So I start off with this big general idea. It's kind of eye-catching, and it also sets the stage and shows why my study is important. Depression among parents and children is a major health concern. And once again, this isn't, super engaging. This isn't a good fiction starting sentence, but it does set the stage. Hey, depression is a really relevant topic. Then I could explain a little bit more. Approximately 1 in 10 mothers experience depression. And then I start to set up the story a little bit. Although rates of clinical depression are low during childhood, they increase in adolescence, particularly among girls. I should also mention that my study was looking at gender differences, so that's why I'm bringing up, hey, girls may be different in how depression increases during adolescence. So then I start providing some background information. So I opened up with this 3 sentences. For you, it only has to be a sentence. Don't think that yours has to be my length. But, start off with a general idea of, hey, social, for the groups that are doing social media, maybe talk about the importance of why studying social media is important. Because, like something like 95% of people have it, right? It's really prevalent. Or maybe, for groups that are doing self-esteem or perceived stress, which all of you are actually. So, maybe you want to start off talking about the importance of why, people should be studying perceived stress. Is stress related to other things in people's lives? Yes. So write about maybe why stress or why self-esteem is important. This eye-catching first sentence that kind of sets the stage for the study. Anyway, so we're continuing on. I'm not going to read them, but these 3 sentences right here are just background research. It's saying, hey, prior studies have found this and this. Other studies have found this and that. So it's kind of setting the stage. It's really summarizing my entire introduction in those 2 or 3 sentences. Then finally, I kind of transition not into what's unknown, but rather why my research is needed. Given that rates of child and adolescent depression are continuing to rise, further research is still needed. And then finally, the final sentence, thus in the present study, we examined, and then I talk about what we actually did in the remainder of that sentence. So hopefully you can see this general structure of this intro paragraph. And once again, yours does not have to be this long or as detailed. I just wanted to show you mine because hopefully you can see I start off with this just general, hey, depression is bad, and here are kind of some rates of depression. Then I talk about, here are some prior findings. And then I talk about transition into what's unknown, not necessarily what's unknown, but hey, further research is still needed because depression is still on the rise. And then I talk about my study in the last sentence. So hopefully this kind of put into perspective what I was talking about here with these bullet points. Once again, the outline homework assignment has this laid out even better, and it tells you, hey, we need 1 sentence about this, 1 sentence about this, and so on. Anyways, the next part of the introduction is to develop the background. So this is where the meat and bones, I guess, if you want to call it, of your introduction are. So the goal is to briefly review previous research relevant to your topic. So this is where you're going to bring up those studies that I had you look for. You already have 3 for your homework assignment. You're going to need 6 total. So I would suggest as a group you start sharing the manuscripts that you found around, so that way you all have plenty to choose from. But this is where you essentially just write about what prior research has done, or what they have found. So you start off broad, and then you narrow down more into specific studies that are looking at specifically what you are looking at. So let me give you an example of starting off broad. So for groups that are doing, well, actually all of you. So since you're doing self-esteem or social media, starting off, or perceived stress, excuse me, you could start off by talking about just very generally, like what perceived stress is, what is self-esteem. Then you talk about what is exercise, what is social media. You get a little bit more specific. Anyways, you want to organize the literature around themes. So A good introduction, meat and bones section of the introduction just doesn't say, hey, this study found X. Next sentence, this study found this. This study found that. Rather, your paragraphs need to revolve around themes. So what is the consensus from prior studies? What do we know? What were some of the strengths or weaknesses of those studies? What lines of research have received a lot of attention? These are just some things to keep into consideration as you're writing. What future research needs to be done? Because once again, the intro, the homework in number 4 is really going to lay out each paragraph. I'm going to show you in a couple of slides, like your second paragraph, after the first paragraph after your introduction paragraph should be about how did prior studies measure your IV? The next paragraph, how did prior studies measure your DV? So make sure you're really, you're keeping that into consideration when you're finding or reading research studies. Anyway, so you have the first part, which is your introductory paragraph. You have the second part, which is the meat and bones of your introduction, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. And then finally, you have the overview of the current study, your final paragraph. So this is where you're clearly going to state your research question. You're going to outline the basic study design. So just enough info to put your hypothesis into context. So, you're going to talk about, hey, we measured using a self-report measure of self-esteem and social media, we assess the relationship between these two, right? And then you explicitly state your hypothesis. So here's a good example. It's only 2 sentences, right? It's a good concluding paragraph. In the current study, the relationship between smoking and social relationships will be investigated by correlating self-reported amount of smoking and number of friends. So they bring up their research question, right? Smoking and social relationships. They talk about their study design. Well, they're going to do a correlation. They talk about how they measured or they operationally defined their variables. So how did they measure smoking? I guess just amount of smoking, so maybe number of cigarettes. And how did they measure social relationships? Number of friends. So hopefully you can see these operational definitions are very short and to the point. They're just a phrase. You don't, how did you measure social media? You need to just be a little bit more specific. We looked at social media interactions or positive experiences, something like that. Anyways, let's finish it up with the final sentence. It is expected that greater levels of stress will correspond to poorer social relationships and therefore fewer friends. So they explicitly state their hypothesis. Higher stress will equal lower number of friends. Or I don't know why it says stress, it should be higher smoking. Anyways, higher smoking will correspond to lower friends. So they explicitly state their hypothesis. So let me introduce assignment number 4, which is the introduction outline. So what you're going to be tasked with is writing the opening paragraph. Then you're going to write an overview of the current study. Then you're going to outline the background. And yeah, I'm just going to skip over the finer points because I'm just going to bring up the assignment and show you anyways. You're going to need a reference page, so make sure that you include the reference page. I'm going to go through the references that you submitted today and get that back to you today, so that way you can use it for this assignment. You're going to need at least 6 primary sources, so you already have 3. Make sure you share amongst each other, amongst your group members, just so that you can have more articles. And this is really key right here. Read the directions for this assignment. You should be reading the directions for all of the assignments, just because they contain a lot of good information. But the instructions for this assignment really lay out exactly what you need to do. So let me show you the actual assignment. All right. So what I want you to, in yellow is are examples, so what you need to do. So let's start off with first off, the introductory paragraph. Write an opening paragraph that provides context for the introduction. So you need to write an opening paragraph like we talked about a couple slides ago. However, because this is one of the reasons why I said, make sure you really read the instructions. I basically lay it out sentence by sentence what you need to write. So your first sentence should grab your reader's attention with an opening sentence or sentences. Then the next sentence should be summarize a central previous finding or 2. Then the next sentence should be transition from what's previous work to unknown. So like I said, hey, more research needs to be conducted with social media and how it influences self-esteem, or whatever 2 topics. And then you clearly state your topic and convey its importance. So in yellow throughout the entire assignment is just an example. Yours does not have to be this long or as detailed. but just make sure that you have all of these points that we tell you in the directions. So just make sure that, at a minimum, while it should be, maybe 5 or 6 sentences, 5 to 7 sentences, at a minimum, I should see 4 sentences, right? Each one of these should be a sentence at a minimum. All right, so that's the introductory paragraph. Let's move down to the overview of the current study. So this is actually the final paragraph of your introduction. We just have it after the introduction. Anyways, once again, we have it laid out here pretty clearly. Clearly state your research question, provide enough information, and state your hypothesis. And then once again, we have an example. All right, so this is where it changes a little bit. So that should be pretty self-explanatory. Just follow along with the instructions. Once again, I should clearly see 3 sentences here at a minimum, but actually not even at a minimum. Maybe 4 sentences, but 3 at a minimum, and no more than 5. Here, anywhere from 4 to 8 sentences for the first one. Anyways, let's move on to the kind of the meat and bones part of the study. And here things are a little bit different, but also easier for you. So for section 3A, what you need to do is in just 1 sentence or bullet point, so don't get too crazy, I just need 1 sentence. I want you to describe the result / main point of each of your articles. So just in 1 sentence, tell me what the general gist is. What is the main point of this study? So I want you to do that for all 6 articles, or more if you want to do more. And then, okay, so that's 3A. So just 1 sentence about the main point of each study. Then 3B, I want you to start to organize it, but we give you how you should organize it. So for each paragraph, I just want you to summarize 1 to 2 sentences, the gist of what that paragraph will be in your final paper. So for right now, just use the following organization. So for 3BI, I guess, for the first part of 3B, we're going to want you to talk about how did prior studies operationalize your independent and dependent variables. So there should be 2 paragraphs here. And once again, I just want you to write 1 or 2 sentences for each paragraph. And, so don't overthink this. But what should these 1 to 2 sentences cover? Well, I want to know how did your prior studies measure social media use? How did they measure self-esteem, exercise, body image, anxiety, stress, whatever your research studies looked at? How did they measure it? So if they used, most of them, maybe the exercise used actual observational physiological measures, but most studies are probably going to use self-report measures. Well, tell me, what measure did they use? What kind of questions were they were asked? How did they add it all? Did they add the scores up? Were they averaged? So anyways, what you can see here is you should have 2 paragraphs, 1 about your independent variable and 1 about your dependent variable. Let's just say paragraph 1 is your independent variable, paragraph 2 is your dependent variable, and you just 1 or 2 sentences how they were measured. This is not going to go, these sentences aren't going to go into your paper. This is just for you to know that, okay, hey, this paragraph is going to be about this. And so you just get a general idea whenever you go to write the actual intro in a week. So yeah, paragraph 1, how did they measure your IV? Paragraph 2, how did they measure your DV? And make sure you include references at the bottom of each, just so that way you can go back to them later. One thing I would like to suggest while you're doing this homework assignment is actually put effort into it. I know that, of course, you should always put effort into it, but all of these assignments are going to build upon each other. So assignment number 7, that's going to be assigned next Wednesday, is going to ask you to, hey, now I want you to actually write your introduction. So the more work and effort and thought that you put into this, and once again, I don't need you to write a paragraph here, just write 1 or 2 sentences. But the more thought you put into this, the easier your life is going to be later on. Writing an introduction, just sitting down and writing an introduction is not easy. So I really highly suggest you follow along with this outline, because your life will be a lot easier in the coming weeks. All right, so we have paragraph 1 about the IV, how was it measured? Paragraph 2, how's the DV measured? Next up, I want you to tell me why or what has previous research found, or how do I want to put this in words? So prior research, whenever you're reading your prior literature, you should see that they talk about, hey, here's why we think our IV and our dependent variable are related. Why is social media and self-esteem related, right? That should be what the entire paper is about. So what I want you to tell me is, well, what did they find, right? What are they suggesting? Or let's back up. So this part is, what did they find? So just have, 2 or 3 paragraphs here where you just say, hey, this is what they found. These are some general themes that are found. And hopefully you have found, maybe 2 or 3 studies that kind of find the same thing, or that find the general same thing. They may have measured their variables different, but hey, these 2 studies found that social media and depression are related. And these 2 studies found this, and these 3 studies, found kind of the same thing. So your paragraph should revolve around themes. For example, this paragraph was found that using some social media sites is associated with lower academic success. So we have a paragraph on, hey, social media, lower academic success. And then, which as another example, they found another paragraph or a study which showed that, hey, using technology in class, which could include social media, was associated with higher academic success. So actually, maybe it's the exact opposite finding, which is perfectly fine. If you have research that says, hey, social media and self-esteem, or social media impairs self-esteem negatively, and you have some studies that say, hey, it actually it shows benefits. And there is research out there that does show that there are positive sides to social media. There's positive and negatives to exercise. So you may have research that contradicts, and that's perfectly fine. It's actually really good. Anyway, so you want 2 paragraphs, 2 to 3 paragraphs here about some common themes that you found regarding prior findings. Then this next one, your theoretical model or review. So this is where research will say, hey, here's why we think that your independent variable is related to your dependent variable. And now I want you to bring it up here in a paragraph. Well, what did they say? For this particular research student's paper, it looked like they were talking about social media and academic, social media and like grades. And so they say, hey, social media, people are on social media a lot. Prior research suggests that people who use social media more may reduce the amount of time they spend offline, which could leave little time to actually study. Anyways, that's what prior research found. So all of your studies should have, or all of your topics, prior research should have said, hey, here's why we think exercise is related to self-esteem, or why we think your IV is related to your DV. You should hopefully notice that throughout all of your readings. And now they may say there's multiple things, and which is perfectly fine. You can bring that up here. But anyways, we want 1 paragraph talking about just this overall theoretical/model review. Why do we expect your IV and your DV to be related? And then finally, this one can be really hard to do, limitations of prior work. So I'm not going to go through all of this. So make sure you read it because it gives you some examples. Maybe there were some problems with samples, meaning they weren't diverse. Maybe it was mostly girls or mostly white people, or for whatever reason, there may be some limitations. Go ahead and just have a paragraph on that. One thing to help you out with this, because I know finding limitations can be really hard. At the end of every research study, there will always be a section on limitations. So, read that and see if you start seeing some common themes, and you probably will. You'll probably start seeing, hey, the sample's not all that great. It's mostly females, or it's mostly college students. So yeah, make sure you check out the limitations section of empirical articles, because this will help you a lot for this section. Anyways, I hope you see that this isn't too much. What we expect of you is in yellow. But lengthwise, it doesn't have to be this long. Yeah, does anyone have any questions about this? Hopefully it's relatively straightforward. I think that we laid it out pretty well with what laying out what needs to be in each paragraph, and you even break it down sentence by sentence. If you, to get a 15 out of 15 on this paper, or to get an A on this paper, let me say, because I'm, points may be taken off here and there, but to get an A on this paper, I just want you to see, I want to see that you put effort in, and that, you have all four, like, for example, you have all four of these points. It should be at least 4 sentences long, and all of this is covered. So that's what I want to see. Just put some effort in. Not only will it get you a good grade, but it'll also make your life a lot easier in the future when you actually have to write this. So the more work you put in now, the easier your life will be later. Any questions about assignment number 4? Oh, and then let's see what else. There needs to be a reference page. Yeah, an APA style reference page. Make sure, I will definitely try to get you your assignment number 3 reference, your 3 references by tonight. If not, I can't get it tonight, by tomorrow afternoon. So that way you can see, what changes you need to make with your references. But yeah, so you need at least 6 primary articles. Make sure you have 6. Once again, share around with your group. All right, and then I'll send you an email. I said it before. You turn it in by Saturday at noon, plus 2 extra credit points. All right, I'm not seeing any questions about this. Let's see here. All right, so these next couple slides in this PowerPoint, I kind of already talked about bringing up on the when I went through the homework assignment. So I'm just going to skip through these next couple of slides. If you want to learn, it's not even learn more. I talked about almost all of this. Come back and look at this PowerPoint, but I have gone over all of these. Theoretical model, limitation of previous work. All right. Some general writing tips. Just consider your audience. Assume that your reader has general knowledge of psychology, but isn't an expert on your topic. So I don't need you to define what, social media is, right? I think we all know what social media is, but maybe for something like self-esteem, you might want to provide a definition of self-esteem, or, maybe perceived stress. So for our purposes, assume you're writing for another psychology student with a similar background. So you don't need to describe really basic things. However, maybe things like self-esteem or perceived stress, since they are your dependent variables, you might want to define them. Always write in past tense when discussing previous research, and then use the organization we're suggesting for now. So that means that assignment 4 outline. For right now, let's just stick with, your second and third paragraph should be about your IV, how it was measured, and your DV, how it was measured. In the real world, you don't write like that, but for the purposes of this class, let's just stick with that organization. It'll make your life a lot easier. All right, any questions about assignment number 4 or the introduction before we jump into an overview of research designs? About assignment number 3. I noticed several people did not submit assignment number 3. Please make sure you do that as soon as possible to avoid losing even more points. However, assignment 3A, I think it is. I believe it's whichever one's the plagiarism avoidance. You need to have that submitted. Otherwise, I will not grade any assignments. I'm not allowed to grade any other assignments. So if you don't do it and you turn in, assignment number, what is this next one? Assignment number 4, I can't grade it. And each day is going to be considered late. And so you'll lose even more points on each assignment. Please make sure you do it. People should be doing the assignments anyways and turning them in when they're due. However, specifically assignment 3A, you need to have that in. Otherwise, I will not grade any future assignments. Is part A automatically emailed to me? I think you can have it set up that it does. However, part A, the city. Oh no, part A, I believe it will automatically go into eCampus. So I can see, because I think that's the one, correct me if I'm wrong, people nod. That's the one where you have to get like at least an 80%. I believe, yeah, okay. So that's the one you have to at least get an 80%, at least a 4 out of 5. That I think, does it tell you your grade after you take it? Okay, cool. So you need at least an 80% on that. The grades automatically come through eCampus, so you don't have to like send me anything for the plagiarism one. But you just need to make sure that you get an 80%. Does it like tell you if you don't get an 80%, they're like, hey, you can't submit this or something like that? So people don't know. Yeah, so it just make sure that you know like that you get an 80%, at least an 80% on it. But then you don't have to email me or anything. It automatically uploads it to eCampus. The only thing that you do have to send to me is assignment 3B, which is the references, and the city training. That has to be uploaded. The certificate has to be uploaded to eCampus. I don't get that. All right, so let's see, we should be able to get out of here early as well today. So let's do an overview of research designs. So research designs differ in the type of questions they can answer, how we go about collecting that data, as well as their internal and external validity. Just bringing up the terms internal and external validity, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the first design I want to talk about is descriptive studies. And like I said, this is just an overview. We're going to be getting more into descriptive studies Wednesday, actually. I was looking down at the syllabus on Wednesday. So this is just a general overview, but descriptive studies are studies that involve describing characteristics or behaviors of a population. We're just describing things, what we see. So the focus is on describing what occurs, not explaining why it occurs. So if you kind of think about most of psychological research and probably everything that you guys have read for your homeworks and for your research studies, is psych research really focuses on explaining the relationship between two variables. Well, descriptive studies are kind of the precursor to that, where they just describe what's happening. So here's some examples. So how does the playground behavior of boys differ from the playground behaviors of girls? So we, for a descriptive study for this, we would go out to the playground and we would just see, okay, how do boys and girls differ in how they play? And we jot down, boys play like this, girls play like that. Yeah, so it's just basic describing. How does the prevalence of depression change with age? We're just looking, at 10 years old, how depressed someone is. All right, how about at 20 years old? What are the rates of depression then? How about at 40 years old? Or, maybe we want to know how common is cheating among WVU students? We're just looking at rates of cheating. Notice that all of these only involve one variable, right? We're just curious about how often something occurs with one variable. And that's going to be an important distinction when we look at the next couple of study designs. So the data may be collected for descriptive studies, the data may be collected using lots of different techniques. We can observe, right? We can actually, we can go out in the playground and observe kids playing. We can use surveys, so we can ask, how often are you on social media? Archival research, so that's just research that's already been done and we can go back in and look at it. Findings for descriptive studies often serve as exploratory data and act as a starting point for experiments or other designs. So if I am, if I want to know, my research looks at social media and depression or well-being, right? Well, one of the first things I can do if I'm an early researcher is I could say, well, how often are people using social media? Is it really that prevalent of a problem? And so I could do a descriptive study, where I send out a survey and I ask, one of the questions I ask is, how often do you use social media? So I can find out rates of social media use. And then I realize, oh, wow, people are using social media a lot and they use it a lot throughout the day. So anyways, that's the idea of a descriptive study. Descriptive studies are those where we just want to describe the behavior of something. And when I say behavior, I don't mean like actual physical behavior. We want to describe a variable. What does it look like? What are the averages? Does it increase or decrease? We're not answering why it increases or decreases. We just want to know, does it? What are their means? So the next design is called a correlational study. And hopefully this term correlation is You know it because you are doing one for your own research. But a correlational study involves examining the relationship between two variables. So now you see from descriptive studies, we started with just looking at one variable. Now we're jumping up into two variables. So what is the relationship between smoking and cancer? Something we can do, right? I can assess how often people smoke, and I can assess rates of cancer, and I can see how they're related. What is the relationship between watching violence on TV and aggressive behavior? Once again, two variables that I can both measure independently and see how are they related. If one goes up, does the other go up? Do people who watch more violence on TV, are they more aggressive? No. Last one, what is the relationship between sense of humor and health? Turns out that people who have a higher sense of humor are actually more healthy. Interesting tidbit. But yeah, so here we're looking at the relationship between two variables. So the data is collected using the same techniques as descriptive studies. So I can do observational, I can ask you in a survey, I can use this archival research where I just look at previous studies, but it's analyzed differently. Once again, we're bringing in two variables now. We're looking at the relationship between two variables, not just one. But it's often used when experiments aren't feasible or realistic. So here's one, adversity, but child adversity and later mental illness. So, and we'll talk about what makes up an experiment in the next slide, but one of the things is we can actually manipulate variables. We'll get into what that means in a little bit, but can we manipulate child adversity ethically? Can I go in and say, okay, you 50 kids, you're going to be abused, and you 50 kids, you're not going to be abused, and you're going to have a great life. And then I could see 20 years down the line how that impacts them mentally or whatever I'm studying. No, you can't do that. But what I can do is I can ask, let's just say you guys, I can say, hey, I could give you an adversity checklist, and then I could assess your mental health, and I could see how those two are related. All right, so once again, main thing of correlational study, you're just assessing the relationship between two variables. If one goes up, does the other go up? Or if one goes up, does the other go down? Or if one, or vice versa. If your one variable goes down, does the other one go up? So that gets us into experiments. So this is where one variable is manipulated to determine its impact on another variable. So if I wanted to know to what extent does deep breathing decrease stress levels, I'm just use this class. I could take half of this class and I could teach you how to do deep breathing exercises, so some sort of meditation. And the other half of the class, I could just give you a chapter to read, from a book or whatever. And I could see, hey, does deep breathing reduce stress? So I could clearly see, because I manipulated our independent variable, I could see, does deep breathing actually reduce stress? Here's another one. Does more frequent testing have a positive impact on student performance? So I could take this class of 25 students, and half of you, we could be normal where we have a quiz every week, and then you have the final exam. The other half of the class, though, I'm not going to give you a quiz every week. Maybe I'll give you 2 quizzes throughout the entire semester. And then I could see in the final exam, because I have 2 groups, those who took a lot of quizzes, those who didn't. And I could see, hey, do those who took more quizzes, do they have a higher score in the final? And it actually turns out that these repeated quizzes, I know they can be annoying sometimes, but by doing these quizzes, it actually is really beneficial for your grades. So we can see this direct cause and effect. We can manipulate our independent variable to see if those 2 groups differ in some way. And that will allow us to have this cause and effect relationship. So well-designed experiments allow us to explain behavior, which allows us to draw conclusions about cause and effect. This is going back to that idea that I brought up a couple weeks ago, where correlation doesn't imply causation. Only when you do an experiment can you ever say, my IV causes changes in the DV. So this is going to be something that knocks a lot of people whenever they write their introduction or their discussion or they're writing up your results. This is going to happen a lot when you're writing up your results, which we'll talk about in a couple weeks. But you can never say, because we are doing a correlational study, you can never talk about cause and effect. You can only do that when conducting an experiment. So let me talk about something that's slightly different, but looks just like an experiment, and it's called quasi-experiments. So quasi-experiments look like experiments, but the independent variable isn't actually manipulated. Remember, with an experiment, you have to manipulate your independent variable. You have to change it in some way. So here's an example. Does the gender of the teacher impact on math learning? Just forget about the in girls part, but let's just say, does the gender of the teacher impact math learning in students? Well, can I change someone's gender? No, right? I can't just be like, snap my fingers and say, you're now a boy. Can't do that. So you can't manipulate things like teacher gender. I mean, I can have two groups where I can have a male teacher and a female teacher, but I am not controlling it. I am not physically manipulating that person's gender. Here's another one. How does socioeconomic status affect opinions on political issues? I could definitely do this study, right? I could assess, your income or where you think you are on the social status ladder. And I could see, what your viewpoint on different political issues are. But can I affect someone's socioeconomic status realistically? No, right? I don't have the money to put people into, higher socioeconomic status. You can't physically change that. I can have groups of people with low socioeconomic status and high socioeconomic status, but I can't physically manipulate that variable. Therefore, it's a quasi-experiment. So it looks like an experiment, but your independent variable can't be manipulated. Can I manipulate childhood adversity? No, right? I can't say you 50 get a bad childhood, you 50 get a good childhood. I'll see you in 10 years and assess you later. You can't do that. So yeah, so a quasi-experiment looks like an experiment, but you can't manipulate that IV. All right, so using a direct message in chat, let's just go ahead and answer a couple questions. Make sure you pay attention to the wording of these questions because the wording will really help you. So what type of research design should I do for this one? I want to know whether listening to classical music while studying causes an increase in exam performance. Should I do a descriptive study, a correlational, an experiment, or a quasi-experimental study? All right. So I'm seeing a decent split between B and C. And one of the things I want you to point out is this word causes. The word causes automatically excludes things like correlational studies and descriptive studies. Remember, descriptive, we're just looking at one variable. Correlational study looks at the relationship. But you can never say, remember, you can never say your IV causes change in your DV in a correlational study. So if you ever see the word causes, it's never a correlational study. So it would be an experiment. You can manipulate classical music, right? I could have one group listen to classical music and one group not listen to classical music. So therefore, by saying causes, it could be quasi-experimental, but with quasi-experimental, remember, you can't manipulate your independent variable, but you can manipulate classical music. You could either, have it or not. All right. Does anyone have any questions as to why this is experiment and not correlational? Because I think a majority of people said B, but the reason why it can't be is because I said cause here. All right, how about this one? I want to know whether there is a relationship between obesity and perceived stress level. Descriptive, correlational, experiment, quasi-experimental. Yeah, so I'm seeing an influx of B. Most people said B. Yeah, I want to know whether there is a relationship between obesity and perceived stress. Relationship, correlational. Now, someone said D, and I could see how you would think it would be D because you can't manipulate obesity, right? I mean, technically, I guess you could. You could do a within subjects design where you have someone who is obese at the beginning and then they go through training programs and are not obese at the end. It's getting too muddy. So, but you could have like not obese people and obese people, and that's that quasi-experimental. However, we just want to know if there's a relationship between the two. Therefore, it's correlational. Is there a relationship between X and Y? Correlational. All right, finally, let's do one more. I want to determine what the types of hand gestures used during natural communication between two women. Is it descriptive, correlational, experiment, quasi-experimental? All right. So I'm seeing varied answers. Let me work through them. Okay, so the answer is A, it's descriptive. We're just talking about one thing here, right? We just want to know what are the different types of hand gestures that are being used. So I would presumably have some count where I would watch two people communicate and I would say, oh, how many times did they use their hands or whatever? It's just describing their hand gestures. Some people said, I'm seeing some answers like quasi-experimental or an experiment. There's only one variable here. So and remember, experiment is, you can say that your IV causes change in the DV. First off, there's only one variable here. So there is no IV or no DV. So I'm a little confused as to why people would think it's an experiment or quasi-experimental just because there's only one variable. So I don't know how to explain that it's not an experiment other than there's only one variable. So we can't look at the cause and effect of just one variable. Yeah, that's, if you need me to explain why experiment and quasi-experimental are wrong, I can try and think about it, and you can stay after class and I can explain it. But that's the only thing I can come up with. It's just one variable. It's just descriptive. All right, so let's end it. 2 or 3 more slides. Let's talk about the reliability and validity of a study. So these are some things these are 2 terms that we've talked about before when we talked about the reliability and validity of a measure, but let's apply it to a study. So we want to evaluate the quality of a study. How good is a study? Well, one of the things we can look at is reliability. And so let me just give you a brief refresher on what reliability is, but it's the consistency or reproducibility of results. So without reliable measurements, meaningful conclusions are impossible. If you remember back to the scale, a non-reliable scale for weight, I would get on, it would say 150 pounds. I would get off, I would get back on in 2 minutes, and it would say 170 pounds. I would get off, get back on, and it would say 110 pounds. That's not reliable, right? I would not expect my weight to differ that much after a couple minutes. It shouldn't differ at all after a couple minutes. Therefore, it should reproduce the same results. So a reliable scale would say 150 every single time. The validity of a measurement is the extent to which the measure examines the intended construct. So if I get on the scale and it says 85 pounds and I get off and I get back on and it says 85 pounds again, and I keep on doing that and it says 85 pounds, well, clearly it's reliable, right? It says the same thing every time, but I am not 85 pounds. I am 6'2". I am definitely not 85 pounds. So therefore it is not measuring my weight. So that's the idea of reliability and validity in measurements, but we can also look at the validity of a study. So there's 2 types of validities of a study. So 2 things you need to know: internal validity and, well, 2 key terms you need to know: internal validity and external validity. So internal validity is the extent to which a study allows for cause and effect conclusions. More internal validity allows you to be more confident that the results that you found are true. So internal validity is influenced by the amount of experimental control. So a tightly knit or a tightly controlled study will have higher internal validity. So what is a highly controlled study? It's a study where, so you're doing an experiment. It's a study where you think of everything that you could possibly go wrong and you control for it. You make sure it is a controlled environment, no distractions, your measures are great, your manipulation is good, and it's big enough of a manipulation that there should be an effect, but you have a lot of control over your experimental design. External validity, on the other hand, is the generalizability of a study to the real world. So do your results that you found in your laboratory, right, or wherever you're doing your experimental study, or the study in general, doesn't have to be experimental, but do the results mean anything outside the context of the experiment? And so let's expand on that a little bit more, in that internal and external validity are a trade-off against one another. So gaining control, so high internal validity, right, your tight control of your study, means introducing artificiality into the study. So a study is less applicable to the real world. So what do I mean by this? So if I want to know how an auditory distraction influences memory, one of the most classic ways to do it is to have two groups of people. One group will be told, hey, you're going to have to remember these words. Okay, so remember these words, memorize them, you have 2 minutes. And halfway through that memorization, we play a sound, right? A phone goes off, I play a song or whatever. I'm trying to give them an auditory distraction. Then they have to do math tests for 5 minutes. So that way we can get that out of short-term memory into long-term memory, because that's what we want to assess, long-term memory. And then they do a memory recall quiz, right? And then the other group doesn't experience the auditory distraction, but they do everything the same. Well, this is a really tightly controlled study. You know, I'm having students sit down, I'm telling them, hey, I want you to memorize this. The auditory distraction happens at the same decibel and the same time for every participant. This is not something that is realistic in the real world, right? Auditory distractions happen all the time. There's probably not going to be a lot of instances in life where you are told for a job or for whatever, hey, you have 2 minutes to memorize these words, and then you have to recall it after doing a math test in 5 minutes, right? That's not really realistic, or that doesn't happen in the real world. So a really tightly controlled study may have a lower external validity, right? You're introducing all of these constraints in your study because the purpose of constraining your experiment or tightly controlling it is because you want to be certain that the changes you're seeing in your dependent variable are due to your different levels of your IV. You want to make sure that your independent variable, however you manipulate it, right, your two groups are really the reason that there are differences in the dependent variable. And in order to do that, you need to control everything else and make sure everything else is the exact same for both groups. This is just not realistic in the real world. So a really tightly controlled study may have less external validity, or it may not be as applicable to the real world. And here is a little diagram to end off the class. Here's a continuum of designs. So experimental studies have high amounts of internal validity, but they're also more likely to have lower external validity. Whereas descriptive studies, presumably because we are observing things in public, or we are just observing things as they naturally occur, descriptive studies have really high external validity, right? Because we are observing things just as they naturally occur, because we just want to get how often are females using hand gestures while communicating, right? We're just observing, not manipulating anything. I just want to observe. So this is as natural as you could get. And then correlation and quasi experiments are a little bit muddied here, where they have more internal validity than just viewing someone out in the street or just viewing someone do something. but their external validity is also a little bit high. It's in the middle. So just so that way, for purposes of the test, obviously know what internal and external are, how they play off each other, and know, do experiments, do experiments have high internal validity or low internal validity? Like, be able to tell me that. And as we can see here, experiments have high amounts of internal validity because we are tightly controlling things. But like I just said, their external validity, there's a trade-off. Highly controlled studies may not be as applicable to the real world, aka they have low external validity. All right. I know things like internal validity and external validity are a little bit complicated, probably more complicated than writing an introduction. Do anyone have any questions about internal and external validity? All right, not seeing any. Just as a reminder, if you haven't done assignment 3 or any other parts, please make sure you do that. Assignment number 4 is due this Sunday. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or stay after class. But if you don't have any questions, I will see you this coming Wednesday. All right, have a good day.